Hey, welcome to Father Games. Today I'm going to do a quick review of Ankh, Gods of Egypt. If you need to learn the rules for the game, I've got a how to play video, which I'll link in this video's description. This is just going to be a quick review, 3 positives, 3 negatives, and then my final score out of 10 at the end. So starting off with positives, my first positive is the most obvious. I'll get that out of the way first. It is the table present. It looks unbelievable on the table, this game. Just quality all around. It's what you come to expect from the other games in this trilogy. It's just expounded. He's expounded on what's been done already, made everything better, more of everything, better quality of everything. It's a game where people walking by just have to stop and take a second to appreciate the value of it when you see it set up. The amount of time and detail that was put into everything on it. It's really, really good. You have these 3D kind of pyramids and temples and obelisks if you get the Kickstarter edition, and all these different guardians, the sculpts, the designs on all those. Some of the best miniatures I've ever seen. I think in the Tomb of Wonder box they have I think it's Patukos. I don't know if you pronounce it that way or not. Probably the best miniature, one of the best miniatures I've ever seen out of any game. It's a heavy, big, very well detailed miniature. It looks amazing, and there's so many good ones in this game. And my next positive is that every player's actions take place on the same board. I thought that was really nice. You can do 2 or 4 actions on each of your turn, or up to 2 or 4 actions. And every time you do an action, you're going to move the corresponding action marker up 1 space. Eric Lang, he could have made it just so you choose 2 actions on your turn and there's no board at all. And I think because he added that board in, that you're moving these pieces to the end, and when they reach the end of the track, then an event will take place. Because he added that in, there's so much more strategy based on that. So regardless of what you want to do on your turn, you have to watch what other players are doing, because if you do what you want on your turn, you might set someone up after you to trigger the event, and they get the benefit from that event because they're going to trigger the event, and then they're going to take control of a monument or be able to put their camels on the board, or they get the tiebreaker in combat. So you really have to watch what other players are doing, and I think that really added a new element to the strategy. Your strategy is not just based on what you need to do, it's based on also what other players are doing. So you have to time things accordingly, and I thought that was a really nice addition to the strategy that can add on to that. And my third positive to this game is the scenarios. I thought it was a nice variety that he added. I don't know how many there is, 12, 15 different scenarios, and they're based on player count. Some are 2 to 5 players, some are just 2 players, some are just 5 players, and because of that, it makes it a really good 2-player game. Blood Rage, the first game in this trilogy, didn't shine as a 2-player game, to put it mildly. Rising Sun, the next game in the trilogy, didn't even have an option for 2 players. This one, it wasn't just something added in, you can do it with 2 players if you want. No, it's really good. Some of the scenarios are just targeted for 2 players only, and because of that, they work really well. They're balanced really well for a 2-player game, and I thought that was really good. But they're also, the scenarios, not just based on the player count. There's so many different scenarios, and that's the replayability, because if you get tired of doing just the same thing over time, you can change up. Now you add cities in some, there's floods in some, there's a bunch of different things that are added in, and I thought that was a really nice touch. The scenarios didn't even need to be added at all. You could just have the game set up the same way, and you play the same way, and different you do different things based on what other people do, and you can still have a good time with it. You can still there's still a lot you could do. But because he added the scenarios in, they're balanced for certain player counts, and there's a lot more variety. So I thought that was really nice that he added that in. That brings me to negatives. My first negative is the obvious one. I'll just get that right out of the way first. It is the merge aspect. When I first heard about the merge ability, so basically what it is, the player at a certain point in the game, the player in last place and the player in second last place, they're going to merge into one god, get both gods' ability. They get 1 action each on their turn, but then they are controlled by each player, and the idea is that they're going to be able to have an advantage to get back the points that they've kind of lost. At first, I thought it was a cool idea. It's original, it's unique, it's something that I haven't ever seen in a game, and if it was done correctly, I think it could have been a really good thing. Something that really added a nice touch to the game. I didn't think it was done very well. I didn't think it really worked. So my issues with it was, for one, the player in second last has to go down to the score that the last player had. So if someone is losing by a mile, the player in second last, they're done at that point. They're going to be going all the way down. Their score marker goes on to the last player's score, and they move together. If it's a close game up to that point, and then you're going all the way down to near the bottom of the track because one player was playing terribly, that can be super frustrating. And it is. It really is frustrating if you're that player that you're almost in third place or almost at the top, but you're not quite there, that you have to go all the way down to the back because you're merging with this player who's terrible at the game. So that I didn't really like. Another thing I didn't like is during the game, you're trying not to communicate with other players, you know, what you're doing, what actions you're taking, you're completing on your turn. I mean, why would you kind of thing. But now that you're both, like you and one other player are now controlling the same god, you don't want to screw up what other players are doing. So like what your other merged god player is doing. So if they're setting up for combat, you know, that player, you know, they get one action each. If that player has it all set up the way they want, then when it comes around to your turn, you can completely screw that up unless you're communicating with each other. And if you are communicating with each other, then everyone else knows what you're trying to do. So it doesn't really work that way. And ultimately, there's no rule on, you know, who gets to choose. You decide. You could both be arguing back and forth, having different strategies that clearly both your strategies aren't good because you're both in last place. But then now you're working against each other, making things even worse. So I just found like you really have to work with each other for that. But in order to do that, you need to communicate with each other. Everyone else will then hear kind of what you're doing. But the biggest complaint I have with the merge is when you get to combat. So you're the last player, the person in the last place at the time of the merge, their combat cards are out of the game, and you guys, the two players are sharing a group of combat cards. It's one card each. Not one card each. It's one card between the pair of you. So you have to decide together on a combat card. And similar to the actions you're taking, you have to communicate with each other. You know, it's ridiculous because you're yelling across the table, what card should we play? Should we play the mirror card? No, I think we should play this card. And then the other two players, they know exactly what card you're playing, so they can adjust what cards they play in the combat according to that. It feels weird. Like, or you sit beside each other and you have to change places, and then you whispering back and forth what card to choose. It just felt weird. It just felt like an added thing that he tried to just add to be unique. It was a really cool idea. Done right, it could have worked really well. For me, it didn't. For a lot of people, it didn't. I just thought it was something that wasn't fully thought out in that case. My second negative is actually the combat cards. So each player has the same set of 7 cards. And I thought it was kind of cool. You have the same cards at the start, so you know what every player is doing. Like, you know what cards they have. When a card's played, it's played out in front of you, and it stays out until you play the Cycle of Mat card to bring them, or Mat, or however you pronounce it, to bring the cards back to your hand. So you can see what other players have played. You know what they have left. The problem with that is there's usually only one, sometimes 2 cards that kind of make sense in each combat. So you kind of know what card a player is going to play before they play it, because there's only, you know, if all your characters are on the desert, you're going to play the one that gets you a devotion for each character in the desert at the end of the game, or at the end of the combat. I wish there was a way that partway through the game, instead of getting an Ankh power, there's like a store where you could buy new cards and add it to your deck. Or if it was like Mage Knight, like each character has 2 unique cards to each god, but then 5, you know, that are the same for every player, or something like that. Some sort of variation where you don't know exactly what's going to happen during the combat, because you do know what they're going to do, like what cards someone's going to play. It's very, very rare that you're surprised. Me anyways, it's very rare that someone plays a card like, oh, didn't see that coming, and then your strategy's kind of ruined on that. You kind of know. It takes the suspense out of combat, because it's like, you know what card's coming out. And my last negative is it just felt like a watered down game. It felt like he tried to take all the good elements out of Blood Rage, all the good elements out of Rising Sun and other games, which is nothing wrong with that. But he took all those elements and kind of watered them down and made them a lesser version. Like, all the things that people liked brought to a lesser version of what they were before. In Blood Rage and Combat, you had combat cards, brought those back, and there was like a lesser version of that. In Rising Sun, people liked the combat where it was you're bidding for combat. You know, he threw that in there with the Plague of Locusts card. It just felt like a watered down version of that, like kind of a, why is this in here kind of thing. It just felt kind of weird. And it just in general, like everything in it just felt kind of watered down. So in combat, it doesn't really matter if you win the combat. If you win a battle, you get 1 devotion. But a player who lost the battle can get 3 devotion if they had the majority of all the monuments, as long as they have a figure left over in that battle. Which brings me to, like, the monuments themselves. There should be so much more tension on, you know, getting control of them. It's just so easy. You can play the build monument card, get 1 instantly under your control, and it's just so easy to do. In the events, you only get to take the monument, in the build monument event, or whatever it's called, you can only get control of 1 monument, and only if you have a figure adjacent to it, and only if no one else owns it. If it's a neutral monument, it's the only way to get control of it, and only 1. So I wish there was some sort of, you know, risk or some sort of tension on the monuments. Like, they could switch control all the time, a lot more than they were. So it's like a watered down version of that, because it felt like so much more could have been done with that. Like, the combat felt so just weird. Like, you can lose the battle and get more points than if you win the battle. And what else? And also, like, there's 3 different win conditions in the game. And at first I thought that was really cool. There's so many different ways you can win. But then when you take a closer look at it, every win condition involves you doing the same thing. It just involves you being higher on the devotion track at a certain point in time. So your strategy doesn't change. It's not like you can do something completely different to win the game or something totally different than everyone else over here. It's like, no, you just have to get higher on the devotion track, and depending on when you do that will determine when you win. So if you're higher on the track when the gods merge, then you don't have to merge. If you're higher on the track when gods are forgotten, if you're out of the red at that point, then you can survive and the other players are eliminated. If you're higher on the track at the end of the game, then you win. If you're higher on the track to get to if you get to the top of the track, then you win automatically. Every action or every win condition is based on you just being up the track. So it's just, I feel like there could have been more with that on the different win conditions. You could have built on that. There's something you can do totally different from other players. If your strategy isn't working, you can change it and win a different way, or something like that could have been added in. I feel like that could have been a really cool way to do it. But either way, it's not a bad game. I felt like there could have been more to it. To give it back, or to give a sort of history, I really enjoyed Blood Rage. From the moment I played it, I really enjoyed it. Rising Sun, I didn't like as much at the start, but after more and more playthroughs, I actually enjoyed a lot more than Blood Rage right now. It's actually one of my favorite games. So I was coming into this game, high expectations. First time I played Ankh, I didn't love it. And I thought maybe because my expectations were too high. I played it more and more. I really gave this a chance. I played tons of different scenarios. I played different player counts. I played this quite a few times, and it just felt like it was missing something for me. I felt like there could have been more to it. I kept buying expansions for it to try to build on it, and they've added a night, like each one I liked it a little bit more after each expansion. The Pharaoh expansion is ultimately, like, if I were to recommend this game, I would say don't even play without the Pharaoh expansion. It is that good that it felt like the Pharaoh expansion added everything that the game was missing, or to some extent it built on a lot of the flaws I felt like the game had. So if you're going to buy this game, I would say definitely get the Pharaoh expansion with it. It really adds a nice new element to the game. More you can do. You have priests now that can worship and do things like that. There's more cards, as I mentioned, like the battle cards weren't enough. There's different cards you can add to your hand in this. It was really good. I thought, when I played it, I just felt like it was like, why wasn't this in the game to begin with? I felt like it wasn't the full game until you add that expansion. So if you're going to get the game, definitely get the Pharaoh expansion. Otherwise, it is a very expensive game, so it's hard for me to recommend it because of how much I didn't love it. It's not a bad game, but it's not great. So I really think that your money could go towards a better game, in my opinion. But it's definitely not a bad game. A lot of people really do like it. I just wasn't one of those people.
Father of Games rating 6.5.
And that's my thoughts on Ankh. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.